Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is part of our ongoing LSA webinar series, Keys to a Winning Multi-Location Mobile Strategy. And I'm Greg Sterling with LSA. I'm here with Tom Kerr of MomentFeed, who's going to be taking us through some very, very interesting case studies that illustrate the different approaches to this issue, managing mobile and social content for multi-location brands and enterprises. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through an overview that helps set up Tom's discussion. So next slide, please. And of course, I have to give the obligatory pitch for our upcoming LSA 17 conference, but I wanted to highlight this particular session, Winning the Last Mile, Challenges of Localizing for Brands. Robert Blatt, who's the CEO of MomentFeed, is going to be on this session together with some other folks who work with multi-location brands and Walgreens, and they're going to be talking about all of the different issues that tie into how do you manage location, separate locations, location pages, location content when you have hundreds or thousands of locations. And it really gets into a discussion of top-down control versus local control, which is a fascinating conversation that Tom will be having a little bit later. So next slide, please. If you haven't already registered, and you're inclined to come, please do so. Our hotel is sold out, but there are other hotels in the area. It's going to be a great show, a really diverse mix of attendees, so I'm really looking forward to it. Very, very exciting. Check out the agenda, and if you haven't already registered, please go ahead and do so. Next slide, please. Oh, I should also mention that we've got a report coming out probably closer toward the end of the month on the same topic. It's going to go into more depth and detail. So you'll be sure to get a notice of that when it's published. Tom will give you kind of a preview of some of the content that will be appearing. So I'm going to do my customary thing here, which is to tell you why location is important and some related points. So everybody who's ever heard me speak before knows that most of consumer spending happens in the offline world. GDP is about to 18 trillion. Only a tiny fraction of retail spending and services spending ever happens online. The latest numbers suggest it's about 8%. Comscore numbers and government numbers are a little bit different. 5 trillion in retail spending alone. E-commerce about 354 million. So, we've got this kind of dichotomy that people always like to talk about, online versus offline, and who's winning, and is traditional retail declining, and so on and so forth. But really, that's sort of beside the point now. Next slide, please. Because what's happening is that digital devices, digital content, mobile devices are being used all the time and everywhere, and they're influencing offline buying. So this is a Deloitte estimate that north of $2 trillion in retail spending has been influenced by digital devices, and the lower graph represents smartphones in particular. And that's in reference to this massive offline spend. So, everybody from personal experience knows this to be the case, and it's really the much more powerful story than the e-commerce versus traditional retail. Excuse me, next slide, please. As you also know from personal experience, we've got a very nonlinear path to purchase now. Depends on how considered the purchase is and how many sources are being used, but there's a kind of a zigzag move between stores and mobile devices and laptops and tablets and social media and review sites and content sites and so on and so forth. Search. Next slide, please. And so consumers are using anywhere from 3 to 10 or more sources for any given purchase decision. And this is a consumer survey that just reflects this kind of fragmented marketplace, different platforms being used, consistent with what we saw previously. Next slide, please. And then within the sort of digital world, this is LSA data that came out last year, but based on 2015 consumer surveys, what are you using to find local products or services. And you can see here people are using search engines, websites, word of mouth referrals, coupons, social networks, and so on. And I highlight the two, friends and family and social networks, because a lot of the word of mouth is happening on social networks, and reviews content is sometimes in here too, even though we have a separate category in this particular slide, just to illustrate how prominent these referral sources are amid a wide range of them that are happening all the time. Next slide, please. And on the question of reviews, reviews are trusted, very, very highly trusted, as much as personal recommendations from friends and family in many cases. So they're very, very important, as everybody on this webinar knows. Next slide. This is Nielsen data that came out of their Global Trust in Advertising report. They don't do this every single year, but they've done a number of them. And it's really a fascinating report, because it ranks traditional and digital media categories by consumer trust. And, it's interesting. Digital media has sort of crept up, but it's much less trusted than traditional media, even though everybody thinks traditional media is dead. That's just a little aside. But these are the most trusted, quote-unquote, media sources. So recommendations, which is often in the context of social media, consumer opinions, reviews, and then editorial content, which can, be any number of things depending on the category. So social media and reviews are the most trusted sources of referrals. Next slide. I feel like my role in these webinars is to tell people everything they already know. Anyway, social media, this is a hotly debated topic. People will sort of express skepticism about the role that social media plays in consumer purchases, and then you always see data that suggests that it's very influential. This is an old stat, but it's been widely cited that 74% of consumers are using social media to help guide purchase decisions, and that often takes the form of a request. Hey, does anybody know? Can anybody recommend? Has anybody had experience with? That's often the context that we see that kind of thing, and then it's a communication tool. But there are also tons of reviews on Facebook in particular. There are product pictures. There's all kinds of stuff now that people are engaging with, Instagram, Pinterest. And so social media is playing an increasing role in purchase decisions. Next slide. So this is just another affirmation of that point, more recent data. 1 in 3 using social networks to find out more information on the path to purchase. This is particularly true for millennials for reasons that are obvious. So if you're if you're targeting that audience, social media is obviously critical. Next slide. This is our data, again, from the same study. And what it shows is that when people go to these sites, they very often will immediately go next to contact a business, either through a phone call, a store visit, website, or contact through email. So review sites and social networks, direct referrals, very, very heavy usage, and high percentage of people going directly to contact the business immediately after that. Next slide. So I'm coming to the end of my portion of the presentation, and here's where we get into local versus corporate pages on social media. I've got 2 sets of data, one from Social Bakers here, which is based on their analysis, and then one from MomentFeed as we segue into Tom's portion of the presentation. So what this slide stands for basically is the proposition that local pages dramatically outperform corporate pages, which may be intuitive for some people, but isn't necessarily obvious. So you see much more engagement and interaction on the local pages for brands. And it's kind of a really dramatic and striking thing. And this is not an isolated example. Next slide. So Tom's going to unpack this a bit more in the context of his discussion and some of his case studies. But their data in the aggregate reflects that about 80% of social interaction, social engagement is happening on these local pages for brands versus the national or corporate pages. So this is another really striking data point, and that shows you as an agency or a brand or multi-location enterprise, you really need to build out these pages. You really need to develop them because the opportunity is huge, and you're missing out if you don't have those pages set up. Now that raises a bunch of questions, which we'll be talking about in just a couple of minutes. But let's go to my final slide. So just to review real quickly, digital is influencing trillions of dollars in offline spending. Social media is a critical part of the consumer path to purchase. You've seen that, including reviews. And as I just mentioned, local social pages, mostly being accessed on mobile devices, by the way, which is why this session has the mobile title, dramatically outperform corporate pages. But how do you execute? How do you manage all those local pages? If you have 1,000 locations or 800 locations, as a practical matter, how do you deal with that? How do you make those local pages rich? And how do you respond to all your customers? Those are very key execution questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who's going to get into some of the discussion on these topics.
Thanks, Greg. Great lead in with lots of compelling statistics there. I'm head of marketing here at MomentFeed. And if you're not familiar with MomentFeed, we're a software company that helps multi-location companies with lots of shops, stores, restaurants, attract more consumers on mobile. And the way we do that is multifold, but what we do have is a lot of really interesting information about multi-location brands and their interactions with consumers across multiple networks. And when I say networks, I'm not talking about AT&T mobile networks. I'm talking about Google, Facebook, Yelp, Bing, and more. Next slide, please. So our customer base is comprised of companies with dozens or hundreds or thousands of locations. And we're really involved in the entire path to purchase. And as Greg mentioned before, that path to purchase is constantly changing. It's not a neat funnel like you see here anymore, but these are the definite stages that the customer goes through when they're making a purchase decision. They may just reference 1, 10, 15 different sources along the way. And as we've learned from the experience of our customers, when we talk about anything local, it's almost a direct equivalent to mobile now. And mobile phones, mobile computers, laptops, any mobile device, everything on that device is trying to make the most relevant recommendation possible to you as the user. Whatever service it is, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, whether it's Bing, they're all in competition to try and satisfy the consumer's needs for the right information at the right time, because that helps them make money through their own advertising. The more you come back to Google, because it's reliable, the more ads they're going to show you and the more money they make. Same with Facebook, etc. So it's in their best interest to make recommendations that are very, very relevant. And what we found was they've used the distance between a consumer and a store, shop, restaurant as one of the biggest factors in making those recommendations really, really good for any particular consumer at any time. Next slide, please. So as you know, if you're a multi-location brand, you have a big challenge. There are a lot of pages, a lot of listings for every single one of your stores or shops or restaurants. And even more importantly, those pages, those listings are getting a much higher degree of consumer interaction than your brand pages. So we take a look at the 80-20%. We're including brand websites in this. So your brand footprint includes your brand social media pages as well as your brand's website, not including necessarily an e-commerce or customer support area. This is for new customers. And your locations are getting so many more interactions, so many more impressions, so many more engagements than your brand footprint. And think about the disparity in the spend at your company between how much you spend on your brand assets versus how much you're spending maintaining and upkeeping and posting to your location assets online. Most of those budget versus impact are out of balance. The other interesting thing here is the majority of the impressions you're getting online or engagements are happening through only 5 different companies. And each of these companies have multiple different apps, services, etc. But these 5 companies really capture 80% of a mobile consumer's activity every day. So Google, Facebook, Apple, Bing, and Yelp are the big players in this space. And unless you're working with the big players, you're really missing out on a lot of ability to influence or impress upon a mobile consumer as to what you're selling, providing at your stores, or what your brand does. Next slide, please. So as I said in my first slide, we really, as a company, are focused across the spectrum from awareness, which is a direct correlation to mobile advertising, to consideration and preference. So being found in search engines, being found in browsers is the first step of consideration. Being recommended by peers or through group ratings and reviews, that helps you generate a preference. And transactions. So just because you have a physical store doesn't mean that there can be a predecessor to actually showing up in the store and buying. So clicks to calls, clicks to directions, or clicks for directions, clicks to order ahead or order online are all important signals that lead to in-store purchases and actual foot traffic measurement as far as the transaction goes. And that circulates back to loyalty and advocacy. If you have a good experience, you write a good review, that filters back into other people's consideration and preferences. Next slide, please. So along the way, mobile influences the whole journey. Now, local marketing or neighborhood marketing or mobile marketing is really important because all of these networks, the top 5 especially, are recommending the location nearest to the consumer over the brand. So if you did a Google search for hamburgers or for sports equipment, you would see the top 3 recommendations are Google My Business listings, and they are stores that are close to you. This is happening 99% of the time now. So a near me search is a mobile search, and these mobile services are making recommendations based on distance. What that means from a benefit perspective is if you're able to get your locations properly listed in search and browse functionalities in these different applications and services, you get increased message frequency and increased brand trust, because what's happening, if you can just hit next, is you're showing up in a social network where people see ratings and reviews. They're seeing trust increase because they're seeing other people commenting on the service they got, not from your brand, but from that specific store or that specific restaurant. They're also seeing what friends showed up or what friends like that specific store or specific restaurant. Very, very influential, as Greg pointed out earlier. 85% of mobile users look to reviews just as much as they look to personal recommendations. So really, really critical. You're also getting more engagement, right? So if you're on a network, it's not just a one-way signal, it's a two-way signal. You're able to have conversations. And what people are really looking for on local pages is interaction. If they feel like the brand is paying attention or the store manager is paying attention to the store local page, they feel much better and much more trusting of that store because someone's just paying attention. So it's not necessarily a rating or review. It's just the the feeling that it's their neighborhood mom and pop shop, even if it is a multi-location brand. Next slide, please. So when we take a look at local relevance and why that's important, coming up with, putting your locations as the storefront on mobile, we see a wide variety of companies and wide variety of approaches to this. And this is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the time here, is how different companies are taking different approaches. Because it's really hard to maintain a location page on one network on a daily basis, never mind a dozen, never mind 100, never mind across 5 different networks. So it's very time-consuming. It requires a lot of planning. It requires increased staffing if you were going to do this in a manual way. So many brands are taking the approach of, I don't want to touch my local pages. I'm going to syndicate publishing to those local pages, or I'm going to ignore them completely. And what we're seeing is a lack of differentiation for those brands online or on mobile, and we're seeing them basically becoming invisible because there's no engagement, because there's no response from the company on the local pages. The local pages aren't showing up in search. They're not showing up at the top of any list in Yelp because of it looks like the brand doesn't care. And Google really reinforces this in their direct messaging when they say, we want to make the best recommendations for consumers. So if we feel like signals on a specific page are showing us that that page is great for a consumer, we want to recommend it. Now, if the brand isn't responding to questions and comments and reviews, that page isn't really great for the consumer. So local relevance spectrum, we have national brands that really want to just maintain their brand pages. This is okay in some cases. If you have no differentiation between your stores, between your locations, in fact, the store should be exactly the same from place to place, totally fine. A national brand like a rental car company might say, look, we have the same experience, we have the same training, the same uniforms, every single location, we want that consistent experience. We don't actually want to highlight the difference between Atlanta Airport and JFK because it's not important to us. National brand control, perfectly acceptable solution. We also have customers on the exact other end of that spectrum. And each store is unique. Say it's a gym. That gym has different staff members. They have different class schedules. They have different equipment. They have different facilities. They may have a bar in the front. They may have a pool. Right? Every location is very, very different. And the manager of that location really wants their location to stand out. They've also got different people coming in every day, regulars. That makes the atmosphere, the personality of the gym very, very special. They have special events. Anything that's very local and very relevant and can be used to transform a multi-location company into a collection of these unique and awesome places makes a consumer's mobile experience so much better. And we have regional or I want to say hybrid versions of these where there's some unique differentiation, but there's also the need for brand consistency. And we also see some regional differences in national chains where during the winter they're having specials on snowblowers in the Northeast or the Midwest and specials on beach chairs in the Southwest. So there's definitely seasonal differences in regions throughout the country. There's also inventory preferences and specific taste differences for national brands. So it's not necessarily unique to the store, but it's unique to the region or area or territory. Next slide, please. So what system works best is really dependent on what goals you have and how much you can centralize or distribute your marketing. When I say marketing, I mean everything you can do through, say, a Facebook page. On a Facebook page, you can do a lot of things. You can advertise, you can post directly, you can get consumer comments, likes, shares, and you can also get direct consumer inquiries. I've got a problem, I've got a question. So from advertising to marketing to customer care is really what we're looking at. So centralized, you're managing your entire mobile experience at the brand level. Every store looks like the brand. Every post is basically coming from the brand. Distributed, you're really empowering the local managers to make a lot of these choices. You're trying to get them to post what's happening at their local or at their store, their shop, their restaurant on a daily basis, highlighting the guests that come in, highlighting the shoppers that come in, highlighting the specials that they have, making each one very unique while still under a general brand umbrella. And hybrid would be a little bit of both. Sometimes you want the store manager or the location manager to respond to a one-star review because there's specific information he has about that particular customer. But maybe you want to respond and thank all 5-star reviewers with just a great to see you. And you want to be able to do that on a broad scale. So there's some brand-centric activity you want to do, maintain consistency, and there's also some location-centric activity you want to do to provide unique customer interaction. Next slide, please. So we call this distributed marketing, even though, again, it's advertising, marketing, and customer care, where you have the ability to go up and down from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid in this case, where you can have brand oversight, brand consistency, and or territory oversight, territory consistency, but also leave some of that up to the discretion of the managers. What we found through all of our clients is local engagement generates higher interaction level, a higher repeat purchase level, and basically a higher CTR on everything you're posting. You're really reaching out with much more relevant information to consumers that care at that level. And so it really increases all of the metrics and stats that you would expect to increase on ads, on posts, on shares, everything. Next slide, please. So one of the issues that people have as they say, I want to allow my stores to do more online is reducing risk, right? What happens if a store manager goes rogue and posts something crazy that we don't want to see as a brand? How do I allocate budgets? If everyone has their own local marketing budget, how do I make sure that they're spending it in the right way? How do I make sure they're spending all of it or not going over their budget allocation? How am I maintaining my brand, keeping brand consistency and making sure they're not distorting my logo and things like that? And how do I monitor them? If I've got 500 stores, how do I get feedback in any reasonable way on how those stores are doing, one at a time or by group or by franchise manager? So just monitoring and measuring success is really hard. And one of the bigger issues is I've got store managers, sure, but they're not marketers. They don't necessarily know what to do with this information or how to use social media. So that's what we've seen all different aspects of each of these problems with empowering the locations to do more marketing. And sometimes the answer is not to allow the locations to do more marketing. It's to virtually look like you're doing marketing from the location. We can do that through some interesting and cool software automation, but without some sort of system to manage it, it's impossible to do it with a central marketing team. So one of customers that we have that has done really well with a central control model is the Habit Burger. And these guys have really grown rapidly. Fast casual restaurant chain, not super huge yet, but definitely sizable. And they really wanted to come out and get noticed. So if you search for hamburger in Google, for instance, it's really hard to say that any one burger place is going to come up on the top of the list all the time. And these guys had enough foresight to say, look, we know mobile is really important to our customer base. We really want to focus on being first in that list. What can we do to improve that? How can we get more engagement through mobile and get more people coming in to buy from us rather than lots of competitors? Next slide, please. So I'm going to have to flip through this. They really engaged across all the social channels. So they didn't focus on just Facebook. They focused on everything from Yelp to Snapchat to Twitter, Instagram. They tried to embrace them all. They knew that consumers would trust each of these at different ways and different levels. And they used a lot of user-generated content to drive home their messaging. So instead of coming up with, hey, this is our brand message, they're repurposing content. So they would ask users for permission. Hey, that was a great Instagram photo you took at our store or restaurant yesterday. Can we reuse it? And they would push that out from the store level to all of their fans. It's a great way to really make customers feel special. Hey, that's a great photo. And also put their store in the frame of the customer. What does the customer really feel like makes my store stand out? And a lot of time it has nothing to do with the food. It has nothing to do with the environment. It's got to do with the feeling, the emotion that goes along with whatever photo that is, or whatever post, or whatever comment. And they used local insights to really gauge new store performance and benchmark staffing levels that they would need to launch the store because they're looking at foot traffic in the area. Next slide, please. So by engaging MomentFeed, they were able to grow 23% new locations. We didn't help them do that, but what we helped them do was staff those stores accordingly based on foot traffic benchmarks against their other stores. So they could see in the area if the store is in a mall, if the store is in a strip mall, what the foot traffic was without the store being opened, and then what the foot traffic became when the store was open. And the difference in baseline was what they needed to start staffing with. We also helped them do new store announcements through advertising and local awareness, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, things like that. So they really achieved a lot of growth for their new stores, but also we helped them with comp sales for their existing restaurants. We increased their following, increased their engagement, especially on Instagram where they did use a lot of user-generated content. Amazing growth in followers because they became much more relevant at both the neighborhood level, but also from a content perspective. Customers actually cared what other customers were posting, not so much what the brand was posting. And this was all driven by a very small marketing team. It was 3 or 5 people in corporate marketing managing local marketing for 173 locations. The power that behind the software to make all that happen across all of these networks was truly tremendous. So in not having to hire an army of marketers to go out and do this or necessarily train their brand managers or restaurant managers to do this, they were able to accomplish a lot with very little. Next slide, please. So Applebees took the opposite approach, and Applebees was an entirely franchised brand where some of the franchisees are actually pretty big, where they're managing 200 to 500 restaurants. So national brand, but every franchisee is really in charge of the P&L for their own restaurant or set of restaurants. The one thing that Applebees does have for each of these larger franchisees is marketing expertise. So they weren't necessarily relying on the restaurant managers to respond or do social media posts, or relying on their field marketing teams to do that. But they really wanted to become online the brand that they were promoting offline, which was their neighborhood grill and bar. They really want that local neighborhood feel. And each restaurant is built separately and uniquely to try and fit in with the community. So they've really taken this approach from the operations perspective and wanted to make sure it happened from a marketing perspective as well. So their challenge was also getting noticed in a very crowded market. If I'm going to go look for dinner, how do I stand out? And across 19 franchise groups and 950 different restaurant managers, just communicating with that team of people was a big challenge. And keeping them all on brand, even bigger challenge. Next slide, please. So first thing they had to do was try and figure out what their assets were online. None of their, well, not none, but many of their Facebook pages weren't claimed or verified. They had Facebook check-ins by consumers, and there could have been 10 or 15 different check-in locations for an actual single restaurant. So there were many more pages out there than existed for the actual physical one restaurant. So just cleaning up the misinformation was a big challenge for them. And then claiming Facebook pages, claiming Google My Business listings, claiming their Yelp, your Yelp listings was quite a monumental challenge for 2,000 restaurants. Next thing they did was publish from the location level. So after claiming all of these pages and having them verified and making sure the information was accurate, they actually started to engage with customers on their social pages. And they also took that a step further. Some franchisees did this a little bit faster than others. They started advertising, especially on Facebook, to try and promote different happy hours and different specials. And one of the great things was, because it was only happening in certain parts of the organization, certain franchise managers, they could actually benchmark what advertising did favorably or unfavorably to those franchisees versus the ones that weren't doing it. So they had a benchmark that was continuous throughout, where they could really say, hey, this made X number of impact over the stores that weren't doing this. Then they started to get a lot more interaction on their Facebook pages, so they said, hey, we actually need to start responding to these comments and reviews and ratings, not just let people post there. And started to measure the real results in foot traffic and store performance based on how much money they were spending and how much attention each store was getting, so that they could justify either spending more or saying, hey, this isn't working for us. Next page, please. So in claiming their local pages, they claimed 1,900 pages total. They figured out that they had 7,762 duplicates. So these were pages that were on Facebook, in this specific case, that were not official pages. And people had liked those pages. They had checked in with those pages. They had shared those pages with their friends. These were totally unofficial, consumer-generated pages. And when MomentFeed went in to clean this up, they were able to get almost 440,000 fans associated with the correct location. So these were recovered, because otherwise they were liking pages that the brand didn't care to maintain and weren't official pages. So this happens all across Facebook, and it happens all the time. Anyone can check into a location, whether or not it's the official location or not, on their Facebook app, and that page will continue on in eternity until it's merged back to the official page by the brand. So cleanup was a big deal, and generating additional fans that actually cared enough to like the page, like the location page, really meant a lot to the franchise managers. Next slide, please. Responding to reviews and comments. So this is a little increase. They said, all right, we're getting all these reviews and comments now on all these pages we just claimed and we're starting to publish to. Our goal is to try and respond to every single one of them. And that was a monumental challenge, right? If I'm a franchisee and I've got 200 stores, how am I going to respond to all the comments coming in across all those 200 pages? Doing it manually is impossible. I would have to go to every single store page individually. So using a service like MomentFeed, they were able to collate and aggregate all of those reviews, ratings, and replies in one dashboard and be able to prioritize how they responded to those. In one case, there was one franchise that one franchise group running 185 restaurants. One person was able to respond to all of the reviews and ratings, and that was only half of her job. So being able to just view all of these things in one place really helped improve their response rate. They continued to generate more positive feedback just because they were responding And one of the great things about responding to a poor review or a poor rating is usually you can convince the person to change their review at the end of it because of the response process. No one's perfect at a store or a location, but if you show that you're putting your best effort to try and rectify the situation, it really makes an impact on the consumer. And we've seen time and time again people changing a 1-star review to a 4 or 5-star review based on the follow-up service, not based on the original incident. Next slide, please. And with mobile advertising, they were able to actually see and record an increase in foot traffic and an increase in sales based on digital ads. So using Facebook local insights and tracking foot traffic for specific stores that were running ads for happy hour, they were able to see the impressions over a few days and see what that did to their sales over those same, it's usually the same day and following days as a result. So having the ability to really see the effect of their digital efforts was eye-opening, and they're continuing to find more and more ways to refine the insights that they're getting from Facebook and linking those back into not just their digital campaigns, but all their campaigns. And this kind of information is available to the franchise groups, also to the store managers, as well as the central marketing team, so that they can look at groups of restaurants, how franchises are doing, compare one store to another, one restaurant to another. So it's really powerful for monitoring all of this. So even though that they gave up a lot of the central control that a lot of brands crave, they actually didn't, because they were able to spot problems early on with engagement, with advertising, and make sure that they rectified those and did whatever training it took to get the brands up to speed quickly. Next slide, please. And then the last company I'm going to highlight has taken a hybrid approach. So Anytime Fitness has over 3,000 health and fitness clubs. And their goal was to empower their local managers to do more engagement while still maintaining a very consistent brand from a central location. And this is an entirely franchised organization also. But they found that people really engaged much more heavily when the local club posted unique information about that club. And it wasn't corporate brand messaging. It was coming from the club. It was about the trainers in the club and the staff in the club and the people going to the club, much more than it was about any message about any sort of gym equipment, right? People want to know what the hot class is to take and who's training and who's got feedback on different tips and techniques, because they see these people when they go in. It brings mobile experience really to life when they're interacting directly with the people that they see when they visit. Their biggest challenge was brand control. They did not really trust initially that this was going to work. They didn't necessarily think that a manager of a gym was going to do a good job on social media or engage, and they knew that they had different levels of interest in doing this. So some managers actually really wanted to do it and were pushing them to do it. Some really didn't want to have anything to do with marketing. They wanted the brand to do it. Next slide. So what they did was continued to post on all of the local pages for every location from a social media perspective. They did that corporate drumbeat where they were taking a brand message and filtering it down and syndicating it. For the locations that wanted to do more, they were able to opt out of that, and they were able to take over their own location pages, store pages, and post their own content. And so it worked in sort of a hybrid scenario where the managers that wanted to do it could, and the managers that didn't need to. What they've seen over time was the managers that didn't want to do it are seeing the very, very positive results for the managers that did and embraced it, and they're seeing more and more convert to wanting to do it themselves because of the results. And they're able to maintain really good brand consistency by sharing branded content in a content library. So corporate would come up with ads that could be adapted to local markets. They would come up with 5 to 10 different photos, pictures, verbiage, and the franchise manager could select the ones that were most appropriate to them. They did this with social media as well as paid advertising. Next slide. So some of the results were pretty amazing. Look at what they did with 3 corporate marketers. They all of a sudden were able to, in 6 months, create 340,000 engagements on their Facebook pages because they enabled 41,000 managers of these franchises to take part in those conversations. And they were able to monitor all of this and track it over time. They were able to share a lot of information in their content library and generate a lot of impressions through Facebook advertising. So really reaching out to the collective group of fans across all of their location pages. Next slide, please. And if you take a look at what that means from an actual engagement perspective, we talked about 80-20 before, but it's even higher for a brand that's actively engaged in local awareness, and local advertising, and local marketing for mobile, where the local pages have such a high level of interaction growing over time compared to the brand. And you can see the fan base between 246,000 brand fans versus 2 million location-centric fans or local page fans is enormous. You're getting much higher organic reach. You're getting much more authentic and relevant messages to those people, and making each gym really stand out in its own right. Next slide. And one of the additional benefits that I saw was actual increase in Google rank. So when someone was doing a search for gym or 24-hour gyms, over time, because each of their pages was generating more engagement and getting higher reviews, they were able to boost their rankings. And especially their Google My Business rankings would show up at the top of the page. So from fairly low keyword recognition to very, very high keyword recognition for any gym located close to someone doing the search. So engagement really drives awareness, not just for engagement's sake, but also in search. Next slide. So mobile customer experience is multifaceted. There are lots of different areas to concentrate on, but bringing them all together into a cohesive story for the consumer and helping them make and influence their decision along the way is something that's becoming super important, not just for every brand, but especially for multi-location brands, as the location becomes the most important intersection on mobile with consumers.
So thanks very much, everybody, and look forward to seeing you at LSA 17. Look for the white paper coming out soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.